Now I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for the day. Now, I've had the pleasure to introduce many CEOs, CTOs, CDOs, in fact, a whole range of chief executives, but I've never introduced a CXO. So our keynote speaker today is in fact the Chief Exploration Officer, the CXO of Tencent, one of the largest internet companies in the world. He joined Tencent back in 2000 when the company only had 45 employees. Today, over 60,000. And in his words, he's helped to grow an organization that is built to last with positive global impact. Now, today, the company is not only the force behind WeChat, but it's also involved in smart retail, healthcare, transportation, education. And on his LinkedIn profile, David says, life is too short not to have a good time whilst doing it. So we're looking for some of that fun this morning. And he believes we should stay curious about how information technology can really enhance human life. He has a master's degree from the University of California and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Washington. And when it comes to indoor farms, he really believes they have the promise to help human populations grow more food using less resources with more productivity. And most importantly, he believes we should move and do this with a great degree of urgency. So on that note of urgency, it's without further ado, I'd like to hand over to David Wallerstein, the CXO of Tencent. David, over to you, come in.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for everyone for having me this morning or whatever time it is around the world. First of all, I would like to say I just hope everyone is safe and healthy. These are obviously very challenging times, and we're learning more and more about the importance and power of technology in these times, like being able to have this very conference online now. This is quite new for me as well, so I hope we're all learning that we can make a lot of progress despite the challenges we have by using technology. It's very gratifying to see the evolution of this competition, which really started in 2017. And for those of you not familiar with how we started this, I think it's actually interesting to share it because maybe this example can help inspire other teams. I was working out of Silicon Valley. Tencent, as many of you know, is a company based in China or having significant operations in China. And Wageningen is in the Netherlands. And we didn't have contact with each other before. So we kind of met basically through the internet online, and we started exploring ideas. And we had a passion at the time for thinking about how technology can address food security and challenges in food security, and how in particular artificial intelligence could be interesting to explore. So we had a lot of ideas, and we finally settled on this challenge as a way to start working together. And so I want to say that because every initiative starts with a little bit of a spark and a simple idea, and over time it becomes more complicated, it becomes enriched. And here we are roughly 3 years later, and we could ask ourselves, did we ask the right question? And I think the answer is absolutely. This focus on artificial intelligence driving productivity in greenhouses is, I think it's a real game changer. And in fact, I think one of the conclusions of today is, I think with this second competition, we have decisively demonstrated that AI is a true game changer for productivity, for cultivating plants in greenhouse environments. And I think it opens up a whole new universe of possibilities for food production on Earth and agriculture on Earth. And the implications of this will probably be unfolding for many years from now. So this would definitely be the headline from my speech, I think, is that we have now really, I think, decisively demonstrated the power of AI in growing food. But before I go into more details, I just wanted to thank everyone involved in this, particularly everyone at Wageningen, the judges, our partners and co-sponsors, and also the human growers. Let's not forget, they're the ones doing the pruning, they're the ones doing the harvesting, and they're also the very willing competitors. They've known since the beginning of this competition, there's 5 very talented teams out to get them and prove that they can grow faster than them, and they've been really great sports in that and very much part of the process. So I just wanted to thank them. And also I wanted to in particular thank Dr. Silke Hemming, who has done so much as kind of the heart and soul of this initiative from the beginning. And I'm sure many of you have had a chance to meet her and work with her, but I can't see her face now, but hats off to you in particular, Silk, for really at every moment driving this competition. Just a few reflections now as we start thinking about the implications of what we learned and extrapolating that to the industry. It's very interesting to reflect when we were designing the first competition that we weren't sure if this was going to be an interesting competition, in that the AI may not have been good enough. This was always a possibility. And if your results aren't good, if your plants are dying, there's not much to talk about. Well, I think things have very much gone in the other way. We have shown the power of AI. We showed it in our last competition when we had Microsoft, their team, as the winner, and other teams performing really well. And I think we've got some fantastic results to share shortly from this year's competition. We can say, I think, decisively that we have seen the AI teams even raise the bar from where they were last year. We've seen better performance, a more decisive advantage using various types of AI strategies, and different teams are using different kinds of sensors and using the actuators in different ways because they have implications and interactive feedback loops between each other. There's a rich amount of things you can do with your AI strategies informed by sensors, and irrespective of the strategies, every team showed something exciting to offer and to think about. So this is very important. Also, let's also step back and reflect in the same way that we're doing this meeting online, we have essentially tested the power of AI through a pandemic, which has affected most all of our lives, I'm sure, around the world. And there's almost a sub-question that comes from that. Can AI perform well in a pandemic? Can it contribute to food security and food productivity even when we have these challenging times? And I think, again, the decisive answer is yes. So we've also essentially tested these strategies throughout the course of a pandemic, and they've shown their value in that context. It's also very exciting. Okay, so great. So now let's continue to talk a little bit more about next steps for greenhouses. I'd like to extrapolate now and ask some questions for future researchers, future scientists, for future technologists to think about the implications of what we're learning and other associated areas. So next slide, please. As we think about the significance of these findings, I really feel like what we've learned with artificial intelligence can transform the industry. And already we can start to have a desire to get more data. We've done this competition for cucumbers. We've done this competition now for tomatoes, cherry tomatoes. But we have questions about so many other crop types. And can this artificial intelligence driven, can these strategies for using artificial intelligence, can they actually be game changers in terms of the unit economics for other crop types? And to test these questions, we need more data. So I think on different crop types, how they perform, how they are simulated. So this is a very rich area going forward. How far can we push the boundaries using these intelligent strategies now to demonstrate, do we have a game changer with other crop types? It's very, very exciting. I also think when we do business cases for greenhouses going forward, the fundamental business case may be transformed by the power of AI to drive the different unit economics of those business models. In various ways, it may have impact on expertise, location. It may have an impact on productivity models and profitability models. This could really be a game changer, and there's no going back. It only gets more interesting as we further develop these technologies. So that's very exciting. And it could even have a positive ecological impact over time as more and more food production may, in some cases, shift to greenhouses. We actually may be using less water, less pesticides, less land, so on and so forth, to achieve the productivity goals that we have for feeding the world. So it's not just a business question, but also an ecological question as well. And then I start thinking about, are there new ways of actually scaling greenhouses? Could we, because if you can cover, with autonomous strategies, if you can cover larger and larger bits of land or scales of greenhouses, can the fact that they're autonomously driven allow you to manage larger greenhouses, larger spaces with less labor intensity to pull it off and doing it better than the human groups may be able to do otherwise. So I think this is really interesting. Finally, there may be a point in time where our food security concerns are so important that we find it more interesting to have a trade-off between indoor farming and outdoor farming, because with the indoor strategies, we can get more certainty. We can guarantee the environmental conditions in the greenhouse, whereas the climate around us may be shifting. In parts of the world, as we've seen, you can even have locust outbreaks, pathogen outbreaks. Whereas when you're in an indoor environment, you can protect against those risks. So there may be a challenge or a new opportunity to think about the business case. Do you grow certain things outdoors versus indoors, as we can drive more productivity with more certainty? So again, that's very interesting. Now, another point I'd like to make, as the slide is referring to here, is I believe we're going to discover that on Earth, there are regions of the Earth that may be better suited for greenhouse cultivation than others. In the same way that for outdoor agriculture, we have our central valleys of the world. And usually the advantage with the environments on Earth usually relate to abundance of free energy, both in terms of climate and in terms of sun. And I think likewise with greenhouses, we need places with, for example, abundant heat, or at a very low cost, being able to modulate your heat control. You might need it hot and you might need to cool down. So you need to be able to do that. You need abundant green energy with very low marginal costs, abundant water, inexpensive land, being close to ports. When you line up all these factors, I become very interested in questions such as, what is the promise of Arctic environments, for example? Wouldn't make any sense for traditional agriculture, but for greenhouses, if you take, for example, a country like Iceland, which has abundant green energy, many of those factors I just mentioned, abundant heat from geothermal sources, you could actually find regions such as Iceland with very ideal conditions. And we're actually conducting another research project into that very question, and we hope to share some results with this group and others when those results are ready, hopefully later this year. But that's something to consider. So now you can see with the next slide, talking about CO2 emissions. Can we actually back up to CO2 emissions? Yes, thank you. This is as we know, greenhouses require CO2. And often that CO2 that is added doesn't necessarily come from clean sources. We may burn fuels and use the CO2 as a side product, and then it's useful for greenhouses. The CO2 intensity of greenhouses is something that should be addressed as this strategy becomes more and more important on Earth. Depending on how you measure the CO2 intensity in the greenhouse space, you could find that it could be many hundreds of megatons of CO2 that the industry uses. And it could even be more than 1% of total global emissions, depending on how you measure it. And I think there's more research that needs to be done to actually measure it. And of course, the plants are sequestering CO2 by doing their photosynthetic work. So we're not exactly sure what the net emissions are. But what we can say is this is a rich area for more research. How do we apply CO2? Maybe that's an opportunity for actuators with greater efficiency to more accurately or precisely deliver it to the plant and have it used by the plant and result in less waste. Do we need to think about ways to recirculate CO2 in our greenhouse environments so it doesn't go away into the atmosphere, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid? This is a rich area to consider for research, design of greenhouses, actuators for delivering CO2. I leave it as a research question that I think is important. And as a greenhouse industry, we should be staying ahead of questions about this. We should leave it to ourselves to be the ones to drive the questions and research that will guide the industry. But I think it's important to mention this. Next slide, please. Another area that I think is actually quite exciting to explore is how can we, on the other hand, drive the development of seed types, whether it's through breeding or, as I say here, genetic engineering is another approach. However you manage and design your optimized seeds, can we think about opportunities to marry cultivars, seed types, to be optimized for very precise ecological environmental conditions in the greenhouse, which we know we can control with significant accuracy and increasing accuracy, especially with autonomous strategies. So if you can just imagine breeds of plants that are entirely optimized to work under precise greenhouse conditions that we can explore, how much, to what extent can we get productivity yields from marrying these strategies together? I think this is a very significant opportunity. I look forward to seeing more research and projects around this going forward. Next slide, please. Finally, I think there's a question here for many of our participants and our competitors. What does this look like as a business? Commercializing some of these operations is a major opportunity for the greenhouse industry. We have over 500,000 hectares of greenhouses on Earth and much more infrastructure going up all the time. There's a potential to make all of this infrastructure more intelligent with significant productivity gains, saving on resources, driving profits. And we should ask ourselves, what could this business model look like? Is it a subscription? Is it priced per hectare? Do we bundle in the sensors and some actuators up front? How do we pay for that? Who's willing to pay? What are the gains? What do the business cases look like? I very much want to encourage this community here to explore the question. And I know some of our competitors now have some really great evidence regarding the strength of their strategies that might help them launch businesses or solutions based on what they've developed here. So it's a very exciting opportunity. So thank you again, and we wish everyone a wonderful journey exploring these technologies, and can't wait to hear the results from the teams. So thank you.
David, thank you very much. If we were in an auditorium or a room, I'd ask everyone to give a huge round of applause. Everyone's no doubt tuning in from their homes and offices around the world, but thank you, really insightful chat, and I think you raised some deeper questions. But we have a few questions from the audience to put to you in the next 5 minutes, but before we do, let's do a quick audience poll. If we can just bring up the poll to find out what you thought tuning in was the key point that you learned from David's presentation there. So first of all, AI has now been demonstrated to significantly boost productivity in greenhouses. B, there are potential and business cases for large-scale greenhouses to meet global food demands. Or C, commercialization of AI dealing with CO2 and exploring ties with genetic engineering will boost large-scale greenhouse production. So what was the key learning from you guys there at the audience? If we can just bring up the result of that polling quickly. There we go. So it's a pretty close race there, David. But the last point, commercialization of AI dealing with CO2 and exploration ties with genetic engineering. So great stuff. Well, thank you for voting. We have some questions from the audience. So first of all, from Ron Seligman, looking backwards, would you say that AI limitations are as low as human knowledge and coding skill limitations to formulate the algorithm? Any thoughts on that, David? So it's kind of tapping into the human skill side of things.
Well, I think increasingly it's a marriage of the two, right? If you look at our team compositions, for example, they're roughly half and half domain experts in areas like biology, agriculture, horticulture, and the other half being AI folks. And having interacted, for example, with our Tencent AI team quite a bit, who's been working with WR since we started this 2017, I know quite a number of those members don't necessarily have domain knowledge. They're really experts in AI, and I think I think we can say that it's all important, and we're all learning from each other, and the strategies are are informing each other. And let's also not forget the role that we still have now with human beings doing the pruning, doing the harvesting, even for the AI teams. And the AI teams may be instructing them how to do the pruning, when to do the pruning, when to do the harvesting. That's also a strategic decision that will affect the growth of the plant. So we haven't fully automated every single aspect of this. There's a very important human component, both in terms of designing those AI strategies, as well as actually, the actuators are still human hands, even if they're receiving a human command for what the humans would like those individuals to do. So I think it's neither this or that. It's all of it. All of it's important. But what we are finding, it's important for this conclusion here, is that using these AI strategies can give us a completely different outcome and a better outcome, higher net profit, higher productivity, saving on resources. So obviously the game changer here is being empowered by those AI strategies.
Very good. I think we can say, diversified and multi-skilled teams connecting with AI as well. But the questions come in because you talked a bit about the changing business models and even locations of greenhouses. And Hub Franson has said, who will own future greenhouses? AI is a high value asset with significant cost. So a question on ownership. Do you see that kind of changing hands with the changing business models you said, David?
For greenhouse ownership? Well, I think there's a greater role for AI companies. This is looking forward to the future for them to maybe be co-investors. With a greenhouse, you still have to think about real estate and infrastructure, architecture, steel, and glass and all this stuff, right? That's not going to change. But it could be that as certain companies build up their expertise in this area and they build up a capital base by providing services in this area, that they can also participate as an investor. We don't have, much of that these days, as far as I know. It's usually, a certain group of greenhouse experts that are doing the traditional experts. But I think that's definitely possible. But I think a lot will still go into the ownership of a greenhouse, not just only the AI strategy. But again, like I was saying, AI players could become increasingly important co-participants in that.
Okay, so more scope and opportunity for co-participation. Well, David, unfortunately, that's all we've got time for on the Q&A. We have lots of other questions and comments coming in, so don't worry, we'll make sure we direct these to David and the Tencent team to try and get back to you. So thank you to the audience for those questions. And David, thank you again for your valuable input and also predictions looking forward to the future.